Welcome to Top Tube. It's all about fun on the bike and some chat about the people that ride one for a living as well. I am joined by the best voice in podcasting and the gingerest beard, the I Carumba to my Sacalobra, Mr. Graham Wilgos.
Hello.
And I'm also joined, as I will be every week, by the weatherman, the professor of the pod, the Morticia Adams to my Mortarolo, Stephen Balby.
Why am I called the weatherman?
We'll get to that at some other point.
We'll come to it.
Yeah.
Disagree.
Don't fret. All will be revealed.
Stephen says hello. And
Salut and chapeau.
And I am David Quainton. We will, in a minute, talk about the opening thrusts of the professional season. But before that, just how are we, chat? Are we excited? It's the first podcast. I'm excited.
Very excited. As well we might be. Steve?
Yeah.
Steve's always excited.
I am always excited, and I'm triply excited, in fact, for this, because I think this is going to be great, and we hope to entertain and inform. And
Well, there we go.
mess around.
And how will we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do all of those
How are we
things.
going to do that? We're
Yeah.
going to know about cycling. We're going to talk about issues that other people may not talk about, and stay on the side of the libel laws.
We're going to try and stay on our bikes.
Yeah.
Try and stay on our metaphorical bikes.
Talking of standing on bikes, what have you been up to this week? Have you been on your bike, Stevie B?
I have not. I am still preparing for a very busy and ambitious, which we'll come to, year of cycling by conversely doing a lot of running.
How's that working out for you?
It's winter and turns out it's cold out. And I live in the countryside out in Hertfordshire, and it turns out that as opposed to running in London, it's really dark, and when someone comes along, you're, instead of finding them interesting, you're just worried that they're going to steal your purse.
So aside from running around being scared,
with
what else have you been
your
up-
purse.
Do you run with your purse
With
all
my
the
big
time?
purse, yeah.
Got any plans for the next week?
I do. I'm going to go and see Simon Gerrans tomorrow evening.
Are you?
Yeah. A bit of time with,
For a
with
social
Simon Gerrans.
thing?
Well,
Close personal friend?
Yeah, well, not a close personal friend. He's launching a new helmet, the Hexo helmet. So,
What's-
the USP of the Hexo is you have your head scanned first, and they shape the helmet to your exact measurements. Going in with an open mind
Right,
as
yeah.
to the brand. So he's no longer, as we know, he's no longer a professional cyclist. He's no longer part of the Pro
retired
Peloton.
last season.
Retired at the end of last season,
Yeah.
from BMC.
So he hasn't wasted any time. He clearly had plans before he retired.
Well, do you know what he's doing now? So he's
Other than partnering
So-
cyclemen with
other yeah. So that's a sort of byproduct of his cycling career. But his main focus now is he's taken up an internship with Goldman Sachs.
Is he?
So Goldman Sachs sporting internship. So
Which is
they
a
offer
sporting internship?
well anyone who has devoted their early life and the early part of their adulthood, and so their 20s, and for Simon Gerrans, most of his 30s at this point, is invited to apply, and Gerrans, having had a distinguished sporting career, and a distinguished cycling career for that matter, has taken up a place at Goldman Sachs. They've obviously welcomed him with open arms, because I think you'd do well to better his sporting pedigree amongst the high standard of applicants that they obviously go for.
And he said he's riding around Richmond Park these days, which
Yeah,
is
so I
very
think he's-
different to riding up the
Gerrans is living in London, is he?
Yeah, apparently
Well, he's
so.
West London based is the word. So Richmond Park's his
Do you think he's still
track of choice currently.
He's kept himself fit, because obviously no one rides around Richmond Park. For anyone who knows Richmond Park or West London generally is quite competitive. I'm sure Simon Gerrans, being a very competitive man, has probably kept himself fit to absolutely crush anyone.
I'm
who
sure
tries to,
he doesn't. I mean, this is a guy that's won a stage in every Grand Tour and 2 monuments, hasn't
Yes.
he? So-
And worn the yellow jersey.
Yeah.
I wonder if he's challenged David Miller's unofficial or official record, actually, of the fastest lap around Richmond Park.
Maybe you can ask him tomorrow.
Oh, it's
Do.
top of my list.
Perfect.
Mm.
Okay, let's talk about what professional cyclists have actually been up to so far, briefly. Obviously, we've had a few races this season. Running from the top, just picking out a few of the most, interesting ones. I saw that in the Colombian Nationals, Dani Martinez, kind of the lesser thought of the young Colombians coming through, put 1 minute 30 into Banao in the TT and is now national champion, which is notable. related to that, hot off the press, we've got the Columbia 2.1 race going now. Do you know who won the team time trial? Have a guess?
Well, I do know who won it, but for the benefit of everyone else, no, David, do tell.
I don't have the first clue.
So EF Education First surprisingly won it. I mean, they've got Uran Martinez, who obviously can TT, it seems. And
Wait, hold the news. EF Education First won a race.
Well, apparently they've sorted out their time. They now have bikes that they can time trial in, which is interesting.
Because you're alluding to the fact that their Cannondale Slice time trial bikes were considered not quite as well developed as some others in the peloton.
I don't know if it's development. It just didn't work for people, did it? That people were like Uran were noticeably slow.
Certainly quite an ugly bike.
Yeah. So I don't know what they're riding now. It's probably we should probably look that up. But nevertheless, they put time into De Koenig, who was second, with Bob Jungels in the lineup. Sky, who were third. With
How far
Froome.
behind?
They were 8 seconds back. Sky were another handful of seconds back, but they had Castro Viejo, Bernal, and Froome in there.
Over what distance?
And it was short. I don't know.
Once again, raising for me the question of what is the point of the team time trial?
It kind of raises a bigger point, which is can we read anything into these early races in general? So we've got another bunch of results. So we have San Juan.
Tour of Valencia.
The Tour of Valencia. We saw at the Tour of Valencia, Yates outclimb Valverde on the last major climb, and one that Valverde I think has won for the last 3 years. Can we read anything into that?
Well, I mean, the only thing I took from that was that Valverde looks noticeably rubbish in his World Champions kit compared to Sagan last year. Yeah. It doesn't even look like he's been measured for it, to be honest. He looks like a fat old man in a replica top.
So aesthetics is basically the main thing we can take at the start of the season ahead of anything else. Yeah. Grunewagen won a sprint there. Who's going to be quickest this year? Him or Viviani?
Dylan Greenpath.
Yeah.
Viviani still for me because he's got the better train.
Right. And what about bike?
What about bike?
No, it's a bad joke, if I'm honest.
We'll edit that out later.
We'll edit that out.
Leave it in.
Yeah.
Leave it all in.
It's all
Warts and all.
Mark Cavendish came back in Tour of San Juan, looked okay in the first sprint and then faded quite badly. Again, should we read anything into that? Or should we just write off everything?
No, these early season things are interesting for the sake of looking at who's riding for who's looking good.
Does that tell you a little bit about appetite with Cav? You got the appetite for the sprint, so came back, first race, San Juan, up there in the first sprint because he kind of wants to make a point.
Which race, Graham?
San Juan.
San Juan.
You want to pick me up on my pronunciation, or do you want to talk about cycling?
I'll be a little one of the other. Cavendish is someone who actually, when you look at it, given that his last 2 years have been so disrupted both by injury and illness, he hasn't actually had many races back to back. So the fact that he's actually doing these races and completing them is probably more important for him in his road.
Yeah, that's what I was coming to. I think it's unfair to judge him currently.
Indeed.
We also saw Remco Evenepoel racing his first professional race at the age of 18, turning 19 at the time actually, and looked strong.
Right, do we think that everyone here out there knows who Remco Evenepoel is? And
They
if
may
they
not.
Don't, they're certainly going to.
Tell me about him.
Well, he's an absolute scary phenomenon.
It's easy for you to say.
He's a phenomenon.
Isn't it? What comes around comes around.
Okay.
It comes out very quickly.
Let's summarise what we know about Remco Evenepoel. He's just turned 19, just signed by De Koenig, who picked him up because someone else would have. He's completely foregone the under-23 stage of his career. He won something like 20 out of 25 races or so. That's not actually correct, but something like that in his junior level.
It's probably pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, an astonishing talent following on from the likes of Sagan and other people historically, Frank Vandenbroek. We'll come on to that. Maybe we'll do an episode about that in the future. But he came to prominence most notably last season in the World Championships, where he crashed in the junior race, lost 2 minutes and rode back on his own to still win the race. Even more impressively, he won the European Road Race Championships by 9 minutes. What was it? 9 minutes 40 odd seconds or something. Jeez. Riding on his own for for a lot of that, which is unbelievably impressive. And it was thought that to skip the under-23 stage of his career and go straight into the pros, he'd learn a lot. He's got a lot of development ahead of him, but showed that in the Tour de San Juan, that he was finishing something like 15th in his first ever professional senior stage. Showed that he's already right up there. And I think scared, he's very well aware of his own talent and, as probably being schooled to sort of manage expectations, but, shows some sign of his youth by saying, well, I think that, some people here are already scared of me. And rightly so, because he's a scary, scary talent. And, as someone else pointed out, he has 4 or 5 years development ahead of him, and he'll still only be like 24.
So what we're saying is that we do think that he's going to realise the talent. It's not going to be like we see in lots of sports. People are really good at, as an outstanding youth, step up and.
Well, I think talent-wise, it's hard to see how he can't, but obviously it's so much down to personality and the support he's given from people around him. Could go either way, but at this stage, he's at least as talented as Sagan was at the same age. Not quite the same rider. Sagan was a bit more physically developed at that age, but equally took a few years to be winning regularly.
We'll see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see when he wins his first professional race. He did very well in the TT, that beaten only by Alaphilippe, I believe. In my research, in the results of the year to date, I was looking up how Valverde, looking up his career, and I couldn't remember when he won a Grand Tour, and it was 2009, the 2009 Vuelta. Guess who came 9th?
Was it Lizzie Dignan's husband?
Lizzie Dignan's husband, Phil Dignan, came
Phil Dignan in his own right.
In his own right, came 9th in the 2009 Vuelta. Which
that is how much, ladies and gents, how much we take for granted British or indeed Irish success in cycling these days. Because I remember back in when I got into cycling in the mid to late 90s, that the only thing we had to cheer about was the Linda McCartney team, who had one British person in. I think it was Charlie Vegalius at the time.
Well, 9th would have been an open top bus around.
Well, it would have been extraordinary. We wouldn't have known how to handle it. It was the fact that we had a team and at least one person in a tour was something to celebrate. So how much the sport has changed, both professionally and indeed the landscape of fitness and cycling and running in this country, is something that I will never take for granted, because I remember what it's like to have to put on tracksuit bottoms to go cycling to get to the edge of town unless people throw garbage at you. And now the people who would call you names will say, "Run, Forrest, run," and now the people who are doing it themselves. And it's an amazing development in the sport, and it's attracted a lot of new people to the sport. My two colleagues here included, who have spent a lot of time playing football at a really good level, and are sort of falling in love with the sport as well. So we'll be talking a lot more about that as I think the series goes on, because I think that's something that is underappreciated, actually, just how much the landscape and cultural fabric has changed in the UK alone over the last 20 years, and the reasons behind that.
Things are changing. Graham, is any changes you've noticed so far in the professional races to date that you think are worth noting? Any trends you've spotted?
I'll tell you one thing I noticed today is the news. You see this about Paris-Roubaix? So one of the most famous stretches in Paris-Roubaix, the Arenberg Trench. Mm-hmm. Officially 100 metres shorter than originally thought.
Oh, really?
So it's because the way they measure the course is more accurate, apparently, this year. I don't know for why.
How were they measuring it before?
Well, they're presumably just spacing it out with a glass of red wine. Right, particularly punchy Belgian beer.
Right? Just taking the word of the farmer.
So in announcing this year's route,
it's shorter
for the Queen of the Classics.
Has it been
the trench is shorter. It's still a 5-star trench. or a 5-star section of Pave, I should say.
If it was a 5-star trench, that I would suggest they would need a 6-star rating for that.
Don't go anywhere near that.
Yeah.
So 100 metres shorter than previously thought. The other thing that I wanted to come on to, it's not road cycling, but I think still worth a mention. Victoria Williamson. The British track cyclist who broke her back, neck, fractured her pelvis, and it effectively degloved her right flank to the extent that you could see her spine on the track at the 6 Days of Rotterdam 3 years ago, has been named in the Track Cycling World Championship squad.
Wow.
Amongst
as a spectator, one assumes.
No. So among some serious company. So as you'd expect, Katie Marchant, Eleanor Barker, Katie Archibald, Laura Kenny, Jason Kenny for that matter, Philip Hines, John Archibald, Ethan Hayter and Ed Clancy all in there. But Victoria Williamson has battled. She had to learn to walk again after this crash.
And how does an injury like that happen on a track?
It was either the boards of the track or the barrier. Her collision with it was at such an angle. So having become entangled with the rider she was racing, she then hit the boards or the barrier in such a way that it was that powerful and going that quickly. It goes to show how unlucky you can be, but also how. I mean, the fact that she's back riding a bike is miraculous.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, I mean,
so good luck to her.
There was for those people who remember Jason Quealy, who took the 1 kilometre gold at, I believe, the 2000 or 2004, 2000, I think, Sydney 2000 Olympics. In what was then the Blue Ribbon event, but has now subsequently been pruned from the Olympic track programme. He, a couple of years later, had a terrible injury where he crashed and broke one of the planks in the track, which then splintered and impaled. It was a very large splinter and it completely impaled his leg. I think
we'll find that picture. We'll put it on our Instagram page, which actually, talking of the Instagram page, which is at Top Tube Podcast for anyone that wants to follow
nice
it.
Plug, David. Are we allowed to do unpaid endorsements if it's our own product?
I'm pretty sure it's
endorsements or disclaimers.
I'll check with our legal team. The Arenberg Trench has also featured already on the Instagram page, and a picture of Eddie Merckx.
One more on Vicky Williamson on pictures, and actually it's probably worth putting an image of her
we
up.
absolutely will.
And the injury to her back, being able to see someone's spine, it's unbelievable. So she blogged about her accident and her recovery and rehabilitation. Well, she does. You can go to her blog, vicswilliamson.co.uk. So vicswilliamson.co.uk.
Well, it's very brave of her to be that transparent.
On the Instagram page and on our Twitter page as well.
I have a question for you, gentlemen. Is a 1-star trench more or less difficult than a 5-star cobbled section? Something for you to think of.
I prefer a 5-star hotel.
Yeah, if we're staying overnight. Okay, well, that's the end of the professional news. Okay, welcome to part 2. We're going to talk a little bit about what we do on a bike. Graham?
So, looking forward to the things we may or may not be looking forward to on the bike this season. And the three of us are returning to the Marmot, the amateur cyclo-sportif held in the Alps each July. It was our first experience of it last year, chaps, the 174-kilometre loop of a route that starts at the foot of Alpe d'Huez, finishes at the summit, rather cruelly, includes 5,000 metres of climbing in order, the summits of...
How do you know it finishes at the summit, Graham?
How do I know? Because two very kind people came down and picked me up, dropped me off at the top. No, so I was about to go over the summits that the route takes in, 3 of which I know very well. Having done Duez before, actually twice before, I know Duez, but not on race day. Unfortunately, I proved that it is beyond was beyond my means to tackle the Marmot without any training. But those 5,000 metres of climbing in order, the Glandon, the Telegraph, the Glibier, and a finish on the famous hairpins of Alpe d'Huez. So, chaps, overriding memories of last year, or perhaps overwhelming memories of last year?
Well, I could wax lyrical. I think what I'm going to see on
but you shaved on the day of the day of the race.
Well, you've got to shave. I'm in the company here of 2 former footballers who haven't yet progressed. I mean, that's an entirely new other debate, which I'm sure we'll get into or not. Yes, I shaved. I'm a true cyclist. I shave my legs like a man. And I did it on the day of the race with a blunt razor, and I bled. And I'm not ashamed of that. And moving on, I think I'm going to seize now on a key point that Graham slipped in there, which is that he tried to do it without any training. And entirely ruined that, because I was hoping that he was going to prove that it was possible to do this 174 kilometres, 5,000 metres climbing with no training. Some people have paid lip service to doing this, but it's turned out that ultimately they are elite marathon runners. Graham was properly going to do it from a standpoint of proper overweight. I mean, Dave and I were both surprised that he turned up at the foot in Bordeaux at the race start heavily pregnant. There's photographic evidence of this, which was available on Twitter. I encourage you to see it. Graham's it's a picture that's never going to go away.
Well, it's a picture that I willingly share quite often, because it's a source of enormous joy to all 3 of us, actually. Yes, I think for lots of reasons, but it does. Yeah, the sort of shape I turned up in was not the sort of shape that was certainly not going to give me an easy day, and it certainly was the most difficult day I've ever had on a bike. And as you say, I finished 11 kilometres short of the finish,
yes.
But those 11 kilometres would have been up the hairpins of Duez.
Yes, no small ordeal. As I say, Graham ruined that by doing 50 kilometres of training 3 days before. He's only training 3 days before he took the flight out there, which is a great disappointment to me. However,
sacrificed my freshness, didn't I?
Yes, one might say he sacrificed his only competitive advantage, his relative freshness. However, he did do three coals, which is more. I mean, David and I had a sock bet on this. I'm ashamed to say that I didn't have the same faith in my friend that David had. I was a bit more realistic. However, I do recount as David and I's day intersected at various points in which we conferred. And I remember the second climb of the day. This is my most overriding memory. The second climb of the day, the Col du Telegraph, was agonisingly hot, and you suddenly realised how punishing the day was going to be and how far you had to go. And I was thinking to myself as I was just turning over my tiny gear as best I could, with all sorts of hopes for a stunning time out of the window and just trying to creep to the finish. I thought, Jesus, Graham's not gonna do it, is he? And then I thought, oh good, I've won my bet then.
David, your memories around about that point, can you recall?
Oh, well, I thought you had no fucking chance in the world of completing it at that stage, to be honest.
Fair.
Because I was, up to that point when I saw Stephen, which was actually down the other side of the Telegraph, I wasn't thinking of anyone other than myself, because I was having a horrendous time, because my legs were starting to cramp. I was really worried I wasn't going to complete it. I'd done training, but it was obviously the wrong form of training. And I still had half the race and 2 mountains to go over. So when I finally bumped into Stephen again, and he asked me whether you'd complete it, knowing that I'd left you behind at the very, very foot of the Glandon and how much pain I was going through, I have to say at that point my faith in you had subsided.
My faith in myself has subsided. I ended up riding up the Telegraph with 2 charming people, Richard and Karen. with whom I stopped at the cafe on top of the Telegraph. There's a lot of talk about getting your nutrition strategy right for an amateur race such as this, and that is one lesson that I will take away too, because I bonked as badly as ever I can remember on a bike too, and I'm not sure the bowl of chips and the Mars bar that I had on top of the Telegraph was an appropriate part of anyone's nutrition strategy. Good for the soul, perhaps. But certainly did me no further favours given the shape and by that stage the distress that I was in.
I think there's a timing mat at the bottom of Alpe d'Huez, and you've got to hit it by 6:30 to get an official time at the top. Me and Stephen managed to hit it well within the time limit, and when I got to the top, Stephen was already waiting, and we had a quick discussion about whether Graham would make it, because neither of us had spoken to him at that point, and looked on the map.
Had you tracked me before that?
Yeah, I tracked you a couple of times. You were pretty slow, but we're at the top, and looked at where you were on my phone, and just looked at each other and went, well, no, there's no chance of that. Went back and tried to have a shower. Obviously, the shower didn't work in our apartment, and then drove the car to pick you up.
One of my, dearly cherished hopes at that point was that Graham could be prevailed upon to finish the race, even if it meant ascending Alpe d'Huez in the dark, the only competitor still left on the mountain. Like a hero of old, and we got down to the bottom, and I thought I was going to suggest to David, why don't we just lock the doors and give him no option but to keep going? And I thought he's not going to be very happy about it at the time, but I think I was sort of hanging on to the idea that he might thank us later. Fortunately, that was sort of quashed when he turned up with his friend Rich, and couldn't realistically forbid both of them entry into the car. So I think that's one that Graham could have sort of meditated on later as a regret, perhaps. But I think the heat of the day has subsided at that point. What was your thoughts at the time?
Well, I was way outside the time limit, so even if I had done it, I wouldn't have officially finished the race, if you see what I mean. So although there was a sort of Cavendish-esque kind of, you're duty bound to honour the race, I don't think the level of suffering that would have entailed, and I might have got a slightly better story out of it. For me, my Marmot was done by that stage. I might have called it even before the Galibier, the summit of the Galibier, were it not for Rich and Karen, both of whom were struggling just as much as I was. That's, for me, one of the loveliest things about the Marmot. One of my particularly fond memories is the camaraderie that you strike up with complete strangers. You're going through exactly the same thing as they are, suffering. If you're going the same pace, you're almost certainly suffering just as badly as they are by that point, because I don't think anyone chooses to go as slow as I was going. So Rich and Karen, thank you for getting me to the foot of Duez and back to Bourg de Son. It was a real pleasure sharing that bowl of frites with you, and that
bowl of frites. Tour de Deutschland.
So Graham, let me ask you the key question here. Given that immediately after, and indeed days after last time, when we were sitting around drinking very nice rosé on top of the mountain, very sunny conditions, and you said unequivocally that you weren't going to do it again. Are you going to do it again?
What did I say? That I'm not going to train again, or that I'm not going to do the race again?
You said you absolutely no. That's you. I think your words were no. That's me done, chaps.
Your Steve Redgrave moment.
I've got nothing to prove.
You have my permission to shoot me. You see me on a bike anywhere near Duez again. Yeah, of course I'm going to do it again, but it's the same as when you finish the marathon. You think, Christ, I never want to do that again, and yet your brain works in a funny way where that thought starts to creep in, and that little acorn flourishes into this rather daft thought that you're going to tackle the most difficult day you've ever had on a bike again.
Well, that's not the last we're going to talk about the Marmot. We'll be back very soon with part 3. So it's been pretty miserable weather outside, hasn't it? None of us have managed to get any long. What's the longest ride you've done
the
so
nights
far?
are fair drawn in.
Well, it's a bit of a shock to me, to be honest, because February is normally tropical out there. But
I've been running. I've not been riding. The longest ride I've done is my commute into the office, which is just over 9 miles, Wimbledon to St Paul's.
So that takes you, what, 2-3
hours?
hours?
Yeah.
what David has
40 minutes.
hinted there is that
40 minutes with a fair one.
as we will get to know, Graham is training averse, or has shown a track record of being pro cake.
Pro cake, anti-training.
I am pro cake, for the record.
How's the training to cake ratio at the moment?
It won't surprise no one to learn that the ratio is wildly balanced in favour of cake.
Right, okay. Well, it's okay because we've only got just under 5 months to go.
I'm sure it'll be fine. 4 Alps in one day, 174
This is 5 months to go till the Marmot. What lessons have we learned that we're going to do differently this year?
I'm going to do exactly the same thing if my form so
Which
far
is no
is any
training and
indication.
150-kilometre ride 2 days before his flight
Which
out.
arguably hampered me. I will definitely change the gearing on my bike.
So, just to clarify, you're still going to do no training?
Well, I might have a crack at it.
Okay.
We'll come back to that later. The point I was getting to was we've commuted
Life gets in the way.
Yeah, life gets in the way. We've commuted in. We've not done a great deal of long rides yet this year, but the rides that we have done have been in pretty miserable weather. And it got me thinking, what is the worst weather you've ridden in? And I can start with mine, or would you like to have a little think about it? Would you, off the top of your head, do you know one that is definitely the worst weather you've
Are we
ever
making
ridden
a
in?
value judgment about weather? Is that what we're doing here?
No, I'm just literally asking you, what's the worst weather you've ridden in?
So yes. The worst weather I've ridden in terms of... Are we talking in terms of lack of enjoyment?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to... Because you can sometimes ride in the pouring rain. It's great, right?
Yeah.
If,
Well, there's
if
a
it's
point you
warm
can't
enough,
get any wetter.
yeah, and then it's fine if it's warm enough. But if it's cold and it's raining, then it's horrible. So the worst weather, technically, might not actually be the weather. What's the weather you've enjoyed the least?
That would be when I had hypothermia.
That's funny. 'Cause-
Compelling.
Yeah.
Continue.
So, was that before you got on the bike or after? When?
No, in fact, I didn't start with hypothermia. I started in Nice, in 40 degrees, and I was wearing a helmet, which isn't always the case for me, and I felt that I wasn't, although I'd never read any stories about it, I wasn't completely sure that your head couldn't cook in your own helmet, and I was working out, is that a possibility? Because it felt like it was.
So, 40-degree heat, and you've ended up with hypothermia. How have you gone from nearly baking to nearly dying? What's the difference? At altitude?
Well, it's a little thing called weather, David. In the Alps, especially altitude, there's a sudden pressure drop in the evening, which can cause flash downpours, including hail.
Right. So where were you? Which mountain?
I was at the Col de la Bonnette, the third highest road pass in Europe.
Which goes up to what, 3,000 metres?
2,700 and something metres if you don't include the Cime de la Bonnette, a dead end, which goes to 2,800.
Anyone know which ones are higher?
It's the highest mountain pass in Europe, the highest road.
The highest is the Col d'Izoard, also in the Alps. There's one in Spain, which is quite high as well. If anyone wants to correct us and can provide evidence, then feel free.
Even a picture. Provide us with a picture of you on the
Yes.
highest.
Interestingly enough, the Col de la Bonnette, despite being this high, is rarely used in the Tour de France and is actually only featured a handful of times.
So, so why, if there was thunderstorms at the top of this mountain, did you ride up it?
Oh, because we are very stupid, and this is exactly why you shouldn't go anywhere unprepared, and why you can get into difficulty even in the most benign seeming circumstances if you don't think about what you're doing. We did not take a raincoat, which would easily have saved us and saved all these problems. We were told by two people at midday who come down there while we were at a cafe stop that it was balmy at the top. We barreled on up.
How long did it take you to get to the point where it started raining?
40 kilometres, so a couple of hours.
Yeah, so a couple of hours later, and what, it's like suddenly the heavens turn black.
It was an absolute torrent. The roads in France are very smooth. It created far better than any British motorway, to be honest. What I can only describe as like riding up a stream. So intense that it was moving large rocks into my path. I moved my wheel left to avoid one. My wheels were taken away by the force of the water.
It was basically turned into some kind of version of Mario Kart going uphill, but in the extreme cold and very wet.
Yes.
So what happened? So when did you find out? So at the top, is there? I've not been up the cold one. Is there somewhere to shelter at the top? And by that time you're too cold. What's happened?
Because it's such an unused, rarely used climb, there's no infrastructure at the top. There's a few Napoleonic era barracks some way down on the descent to the town of Josier on the other side. No, nothing except my guardian angels, a German couple in a Volkswagen campervan, who saw us at the top. It was a miracle that there was anyone else up there at that time of day, just an hour before dark, essentially. The roads were so icy on the way down that, having got soaked through, as you might expect if you're lying in a stream, essentially, you couldn't descend down the other side at any speed because it was essentially ice. And I developed what I later learned was the second stage of hypothermia. So my arms and all my limbs were going all over the place, and I was starting to have crazy thoughts like, you know what, it would be much quicker if I just went straight down the mountain at this point, down the side, and forgot the road, because the road's icy, so maybe I just go straight down the side. This is why some people with hypothermia in icy condition in snowy woods have been found naked outside their tent, because they're convinced that they're
too hot,
burning up.
Yeah.
And anyway, so this German couple came down and said, would you like a lift by any chance? And my two very British companions said, no, take our friend here. And I said, get the fuck in the van, or what I intended to say that. It came across as because I'd gone blue by that point. So they took my clothes off.
Why? Oh, just because of wet clothes. You can't have wet clothes on.
Right.
So you're basically what you're telling me is you ended up naked in the back of a German camper van.
Such conditions promote intimacy.
I mean, I would have been thankful that they came along, but I'm not sure.
Well, no, they were actually amazing people, and I was so out of it by the time we got to our hotel at the bottom that I didn't even have the presence of mind to take their names. But obviously, in the tiny chances that they're listening to this, I genuinely believe, both of you, that you saved my life, and I'm incredibly grateful.
That must have been quite awkward for you then, I presume, being naked in the back of a camper van.
Well, it seemed pretty natural at the time. I mean, I guess the lesson is, however sort of straightened your circumstances are, you still feel relatively British about it and want to sort of put on a good show. So I remember making many sort of comments about, look, so who are you, where are you from, how's your family, all the way down. And at the end, it just transpired. One of my friends said, you've just been blabbing, Stephen, for half an hour. We couldn't understand anything you were saying. And the sad thing is, I thought I was being incredibly debonair.
That's pretty horrific. Graham, what's the worst weather that you've ridden in? What's the worst experience you've had on a bike?
Oh, I didn't end up naked in the back of a German car.
I still have my pants on. Just for
few people have.
Back of a tourist's van.
That's two different questions. What's the worst experience you've had on the bike, and what's the worst weather?
Yeah, worst weather, easy one. You were there. You remember this? We rode from Great Ormond Street Hospital all the way the length of France, over the Pyrenees to Barcelona.
Sorry, chaps, I'm not allowing this. This is the question: is what's the worst weather you've experienced, not the worst weather you've avoided.
Leg 5 of that particular tour was Saint-Amand-Montrond to I can't remember. I think we were heading for Issoire that day, but we only got as far as Montluçon. 6 a.m. we got up. So this is middle of April. 6 a.m. we got up.
It was 2. So just a little bit of context. We rode to Barcelona in 9 days for charity, and it was the wrong time of year. I think we learned from our mistakes.
You didn't know that when you set out?
No, we didn't. So I think it was early April, wasn't it?
It was a bit of a boys' own adventure, and it was badly planned, to say the least. We started in Saint-Amand-Montrond, and you got us up at 6 a.m. And
every morning,
you're tired from the day before, because we've ridden about 100 miles that day, as well as the 3 days previously. You're it's too early to get any sort of breakfast down, so you're in no fit shape to start riding, and then you go out and you're woefully underprepared for the biting cold of a French ski resort, or near to a French ski resort morning. Because I think they ski in Issoire? They ski in that national park?
They do. It's, to be clear on this, we were that unprepared that we had lycra from the waist down, but from the waist up we were in cotton t-shirts.
I can just remember it was pulling the football socks, because that was the stage that we were at. Pulling the football socks over my knees and just feeling like when I'd never see the sun again. I'm just thinking, we can't continue like this. But when the sun came up, it was actually all right. But it was that early start where it was as cold as I've ever known it, and however hard we rode, it was miserable, and you just couldn't get warm.
For the first time on the ride, I actually looked forward to the hills, because going up the hills, you'd work up enough energy to keep yourself vaguely warm, whereas going down the other side was actually horrendous.
Well, usually you'd try and work hard, wouldn't you? You just think, right, if I work harder, it's going to be fine. But there was nothing you could do that morning to warm up.
It was so cold when it warmed up, the spokes on my bike immediately cracked.
I was so happy, because it meant we could stop and rest.
Yeah. So we had to go for some emergency repairs, and we're helped out by a kindly Frenchman.
So it was you, Graham, your cousin Chris, who is 6 foot,
and his mate Tom.
And his mate Tom.
And Chris has formerly played rugby union for Germany, and he weighs quite a lot. So I imagine he was suffering as much as anyone.
Well, I think we all were. I remember that morning. I was shaken up. The worst thing about that was different to the experience I'm going to tell was my hands were so cold. I just couldn't. I was actually scared of going downhill because I didn't think I'd be able to operate.
Okay,
the brakes.
so just to clarify, I had hypothermia and felt like I was being stabbed with 1,000 knives all over my body, and David had cold hands. Interesting. What is an interesting postscript to this is that sitting at home in Britain and receiving updates via text, David reported the next day that they'd been in a bike shop and some French guy said, "Oh no, it's going to be really snowy on those mountains, obviously because it's April." And you could have just found this out before you went. And they said, "Okay, we'll just get the train then."
So we'd gone 437 miles by that point.
Yeah.
And that was day 5.
Yeah.
We were doing all right.
We were doing all right.
To be fair, they were doing really well for people who took football socks with them on a cycling trip.
I think we've learned. I think if we did it again now, it would be a different journey. I think that's fair to say. The coldest, the worst I've ever felt on a bike, not the coldest, was, but certainly the worst, was coming into Cardiff at the end of another charity bike ride, actually. And it had just been raining all day. We'd set off from just this side of the River Severn and gone across the Severn Bridge, across to Cardiff. It rained the whole way, and it doesn't matter, as many of you know, it doesn't matter what weather gear you're wearing. At some point, the rain gets to you. It gets in everywhere, and I had all the overshoes. I had all the gear by this point. I wasn't wearing a cotton t-shirt, but this was a couple of years later, and we were coming into Cardiff, and we were just going down this road, and I found myself physically shaking on the bike to the point that I couldn't control it anymore, and it just got to the point where I just couldn't warm myself up anymore. And I was thinking, this is terrible, because I'm riding with all these people from work, so it was a work charity ride, and there were 20 other people.
Was this the ride you did with Joel Stransky, the South African
so this is the point I'm
goalkeeper?
coming to, is actually Joel Stransky, who scored all the points in the 1995 Rugby World Cup final.
Yes.
Was on this. He's a hero of South African sport, and I was there shaking on my bike, not wanting to look bad in front of everyone else, and I look to my right, and Joel Stransky comes past me, literally shaking on his bike, going, "I want this to stop." And at that point, I actually made me feel a lot better, because I realised I wasn't the only person that was struggling. We were 10 minutes away from the end, but had it been 20, I would have stopped. Was
horrible. Was Stransky in good shape?
He is one of the fittest looking guys I've ever seen.
But quite heavy, though, I imagine.
No, he didn't look like an ounce
quite a
of fat on him. He looked fantastic. And I wish I had his body at his age. To be clear.
David notes. Yes.
and indeed his sporting career. He's Joel Stransky is an incredibly good cyclist and spends a lot of time doing triathlons and cycle events now.
Good guy.
Excellent. Lovely bloke, yeah. So, same time next week.
Same time next week. Looking forward to it.
Dean Babby, the Professor. Goodbye from
weatherman.
you.
It is goodbye from me.
Graham Wilkins.
With tailwinds. It's goodbye from you. And goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. See you next week.